The people of Iraq finally have a new government after a year of impasse. But tough challenges face Prime Minister Mohamed al Sudani: corruption, climate change, Iranian influence, and groups operating outside of the government's control. Zalmay Khalilzad was US ambassador to Iraq from 2005 to 2007. We caught up with him here in Dohuk on the sidelines of the Middle East Peace and Security Forum. This is One on One. The Iraqi government recently formed after a year of debate. What do you see as the major challenges facing Prime Minister Mohamed al Sudani?
Well, the biggest challenge is for him to be able to deliver on the commitments that he has made, because the government was formed based on an agreement, he has to deliver on services, for example, for the Iraqi people. He has to overcome some of the difficulties that have existed in Iraq-Kurdistan relations. He has to protect Iraqi sovereignty because of actions by Iran, attacks that are taking place. So he has lots of challenges, and he has a coalition, a government with lots of demands by some of the parties that he is dependent on. So the biggest challenge is to deliver on what he is committed to delivering.
Let's talk about the militias in Iraq.
Yeah.
An American civilian was recently killed. Right. Is there any way for Prime Minister Sudani to bring them under the control of the central government?
Well, that's one of the biggest challenges, that these are even militias that have no legal standing. And there are people with terroristic background and involvement who are quite active in the government even. So how we can govern, institutionalize, enforce the rule of law, defend Iraqi sovereignty when groups that have are illegally formed and with ties to a neighboring state like Iran, how is he going to make progress in bringing those under control and establishing or making progress toward establishing a rule of law and implementing the other commitments that he has made?
Well, as you said, these militias are closely aligned with Iran's Revolutionary Guards Quds Force. Since the killing of Qasem Soleimani, do you see their influence growing or waning in Iraq and the region?
I think what you see is at times very brazen activity, coercive activity by Iran in coordination with these groups. You've seen Iran use of force and coercive methods to get a desired political outcome in Iraq, or to influence particular policies or projects even. And I think that has created a lot of resentment but fear also on the part of neighboring states. So it's a challenge for these states, but also a challenge for the broader international community, including the United States. What steps are needed to deter and respond to such actions by Iran so that they are decreased or gotten rid of?
Is it fair to reduce Iraqi politics, as some do, to a pro-Iran or anti-Iran dichotomy?
No. That's a dimension, as a key dimension, but no, there are a lot of internal issues. There is issues of agreements, the Constitution, for example, the implementation of the Constitution, the changes in the Constitution, the sort of fundamental things, relation between the center and provinces or regions, relation between Kurdistan and Iraq. So it's a complex system, but the key dimension that is sometimes Iran has been very assertive and using a variety of methods, including force or the threat of force, to achieve its objectives, is an important dimension.
Back in 2016, you argued that Iran was crucial to stabilizing an out-of-control Middle East. You said that America should pursue a hard-headed engagement policy. Given recent events in Iran, do you still hold that view?
I believe I've invented a word in dealing with Iran, which is congagement. You need to have either or is not a good approach to a complex situation. You engage where is necessary and desirable, but you contain those behaviors or policies that are undesirable. So you have to, rather than one or the other, you have to have a mix of the two, and it doesn't have to be 50-50, or you can adjust it as necessary. And right now, I think the adjustment has to be more towards containment, a more, shall we say, heightened containment strategy, because of what's going on inside, what the Iranians are doing in the neighborhood, what Iran is doing internationally, its alliance with the Russians in the war in Ukraine, it's supplying these drones, suicide drones, so-called, because the regime from the very beginning started to use human suicide operations, and now we're talking about suicide drones, and that they could be provided to others as well. So there is no progress on the nuclear issue. They remain determined to get very close, if not actually exercise that option. And the whole of the Middle East is within the range of their missiles, and they're seeking to extend them. So it could also Europe come within the range. So we need to review the policy and adjust it because of the circumstances that we're in.
Iran, along with North Korea, is providing weapons to Russia for the war in Ukraine. In what way does this serve Iran's interests?
That's an interesting question. It may be a quid pro quo, and that is that Russia helped Iran in Syria, for example. It may be helping Iran in other ways. Its programs inside Iran, and the support that Iran is providing also includes not only technical assistance like drones, but also this militia or a private security firm called the Wagner Group, which also is active in Libya and Mali and was active in Syria, is now active in Ukraine, and also has been allowed to open offices, according to various reports, in Tehran or in Iran, to recruit Afghan diaspora, like it did in Syria. The Fatimiyun was a group of Afghan Shiites that the Iranians recruited, trained, and sent to Syria to fight, and this may happen in Ukraine as well.
On Ukraine, you join Henry Kissinger and a host of others in calling for negotiations between Zelensky and Putin. You have also argued that a protracted war would benefit China. What advice would you have for NATO?
Well, I think that we have to help Ukraine to defend itself, and we shouldn't negotiate with Russia without Ukraine. But at the same time, I believe that when the circumstances are right, and they are not at the present time, but maybe it will get there. It probably would have to have Ukraine, Russia, but also the negotiations have to have a broader dimension, because as in the case of the Cuban Missile Crisis, President Eisenhower used to say, sometimes you have to, if you have to solve a problem, you may have to enlarge it. And in the case of the Cuban Missile Crisis, a face-saving that was given was the removal of missiles from Turkey, which was already under consideration, that was not needed there. So that it may take a kind of a dimension that has broader participation. But Ukraine, it can't be a deal at the expense of Ukraine or without Ukraine. Ukraine has to participate, and you have seen an evolution in the Ukrainian position in recent days, in which they say they are ready to end the war and negotiate. Earlier they had said not until there is a change of leadership in Russia. So there's a lot of churning going on right now, but I think it ultimately will have to be a political settlement.
Which country do you see as best positioned to serve as a mediator?
Turkey has done a good job, for example, with regard to the grain shipment, and there are others who also have offered themselves, and there are also channels between, if Russia decides that it wants to negotiate, and it can send a message directly to the US and to Ukraine as well. But there are countries such as Turkey that can play an important role.
Coming back to Iran, back in 2020, candidate Biden had said that going back to the JCPOA was a foreign policy objective, right, a priority. Right. These efforts don't seem to have gone very far. In your view, what has delayed progress?
Well, I think that that Iran, in my judgment, has misplayed this opportunity. And it may be in that it's determined to acquire the nuclear weapons capability. Whether it will actually exercise it immediately or not is different, or as soon as it can. But it's because how would you otherwise explain the price that Iran is willing to pay, has been paying? Perhaps if you add all the cost of the sanctions on Iran, probably be over $1 trillion, maybe more dollars. If it just was interested in nuclear power, the solution could have been found for it. And there are questions about some that IEA has had about some uranium that have been detected in some sites that maybe have been part of a weapons program, maybe, and they're denying access to those sites. And the negotiations are also have stalled. And now it's become complicated given the domestic situation in Iran and the Russian-Iranian cooperation. So I think they did miscalculate and misplayed their hand, other than if they are determined to get close and they need more time to get to where they want to get. And they are making progress, getting ever closer to a nuclear capability with or without an agreement.
On the recent disturbances in Iran, do you believe that these are a genuine indication of a new political landscape in which the Islamic Republic may be weakened or delegitimized?
I think this is very serious, what has happened. It is very broad-based along across ethnic lines, the Baloch and Kurdish areas. It's also young people, women, workers, even clerics, some of them. It seems to me, as someone who's observed Iran for a long time, and I did a book on Iran in 1984, The Government of God, it was called, and I interviewed Khomeini in Paris. So I've been following the Iranian Revolution for a long time, and that it seems that they've lost quite a lot of support. Maybe the majority of the Iranian people where they had so broad support for the change that happened. And now there is broad support against what's going on, that the government is out of touch with the people and doesn't listen, has alienated the Iranians. Now, this is the reality. What will happen? Will Iran and the government come to terms, be responsive to the demands of the people? There may be divisions inside the government on this, but it's very important development that could affect the trajectory of Iran and therefore have a big impact for the region and beyond.
It has been over a year since the Taliban takeover,
Right.
and as you know, many still blame you personally for how things developed.
Right.
Situation facing Afghans today, economic crisis, humanitarian crisis, girls still can't go to school. What is your assessment of the situation right now, and how soon do you think, or will Afghanistan ever return to America's foreign policy priority list?
Well, it's unlikely for it to achieve the kind of priority that it was after 9/11 and during the period that America had forces there. And because of the changes in the world with great power competition and problems, the lack of a roadmap for success, America got frustrated. Terrorism picture had changed and decided to bring the troops home. I appreciate some Afghans were unhappy with me, but I think a golden opportunity that was there was not taken advantage of. The Taliban are making some serious mistakes, in my view. They appear to be repeating some of the mistakes that we see in Afghanistan in the last 40 years, unfortunately repeating itself. And no one else can solve that problem ultimately than themselves, which is to come to an agreement broadly on a formula, whatever it is. We have our values that we sort of from an American perspective, what will be better than what, but they have to come to an agreement on a formula. And now you have a government that's a Talib government without a mandate that's broader. They need to start a consultative process and agree on a formula so that when one group takes power, for example, in 1978, the Communist Party factions took power, and then they moved against everyone else, and that led to a civil war. And if they want to avoid that, they need to do that. Two is to respect, the policies have to respect the views of a broader society, like on education. There is, even among Taliban, one Talib told the Washington Post that 90% of the Talibs oppose the policy of not allowing girls to go to high school. And there are rumors they may move even further and maybe prevent girls from going to university, and that will be devastating. It will lead to a very strong reaction by the international community and naturally by the Afghans. So, and three is they need to do a better job of providing services. That sector, the economy is in poor shape. Part of it is international sanctions. I have been of the view that on sanctions, the Doha agreement that I signed with the Talibs is the best framework, because the government had also supported the fundamental parts of that agreement. And now a lot of the opposition say we should go back to that, which is that agreement. The third important issue besides withdrawal and counterterrorism was a new Afghan government based on inter-Afghan negotiations. So they need to start the process of conversing with each other and agreeing to a process for a government that has a broad mandate from the people.
What incentive do they have to engage in intra-Afghan talks at this point?
Well, if they don't, the other Afghans, eventually maybe will oppose them. More Afghans would leave. If you can't send your daughter to high school, that may be, besides economic reason, a reason to abandon Afghanistan. It maybe lead to more violence and maybe even to actual conflict over time. I mean, the history of Afghanistan actually is something the Talibs should really study and learn from, not to repeat that mistake.
Thank you, Ambassador Khalilzad. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you. It's good to see you.